In Tanzania, a country known for its sweeping savannas, towering Mount Kilimanjaro, and some of the richest wildlife habitats on Earth, the political landscape is once again being reshaped, though not necessarily in a way that promises change. As millions of voters head to the polls this Wednesday, many already know the outcome. The ruling party, Chama cha Mapinduzi, or the Party of the Revolution, looks set to extend its 64-year grip on power. Analysts say the election, which will determine the presidency, members of parliament, and local councillors, is effectively a foregone conclusion. Despite the presence of 17 candidates on the ballot, the incumbent President Samia Suluhu Hassan faces no serious challenge. Human rights groups argue that this has not happened by coincidence, but rather as a result of systematic repression of the opposition, restrictions on the media, and intimidation of civil society. Tanzania's Chama cha Mapinduzi has been in power since the nation's independence in 1961, first under Julius Nyerere, and later through successive leaders who maintained a dominant party system. Today, that dominance remains largely intact. Over 37 million of the country's 60 million citizens are registered to vote, but turnout has traditionally been modest, just over 50% in the 2020 elections, according to the International Foundation for Electoral Systems. The elections this year cover 29 regions across mainland Tanzania, as well as the semi-autonomous island of Zanzibar, which will also vote for its own president and parliament. Winners are determined by simple majority. Whoever receives the most votes wins. Authorities have declared Election Day a public holiday, with early voting having already begun in Zanzibar. Yet beneath the surface of democratic procedure, political competition has been sharply curtailed. At 65, Samia Suluhu Hassan stands as Tanzania's sixth president and its first female head of state. She rose to power unexpectedly in March 2021 following the death of her predecessor, John Magufuli, completing his remaining term as vice president turned president. Hassan's ascent initially sparked optimism, both domestically and internationally. Her leadership marked a stylistic shift from Magufuli's hardline rule, which was characterized by denial of the COVID-19 pandemic and strict control over the press and opposition. Upon taking office, Hassan quickly re-engaged with international health initiatives, joining the WHO-led COVAX program to access vaccines and positioning Tanzania back into global cooperation after years of isolation. She also lifted a 6-year ban on political rallies, signaling a possible thaw in political repression. Her government prioritized infrastructure, extending Magufuli-era projects such as railways and rural electrification, while investing in new education and energy initiatives. Supporters praise her for delivering stability, modernizing transport networks, and maintaining economic resilience in a region marked by volatility. However, in the years since, optimism has faded. Rights organizations now accuse Hassan's government of reverting to the authoritarian tendencies of her predecessor. Amnesty International, in a recent pre-election report, said the government has intensified the repression of opposition voices, civil society, journalists, and human rights defenders. Arrests, forced disappearances, and harassment have become routine tools of political control, even as the government continues to deny such claims. The most glaring sign of this crackdown came with the exclusion of key opposition figures from the race. Among them is Tundu Lissu, the charismatic leader of the largest opposition party, Chadema. Lissu, 57, had spent years in exile in Belgium after surviving an assassination attempt in 2017 when he was shot 16 times. He returned to the country determined to challenge the ruling party, but his path was swiftly blocked. Authorities accuse Lissu of making treasonous remarks at a rally in Mbinga in April, after he urged supporters to consider boycotting the election if the government did not reform the Electoral Commission, a body largely appointed by the president. Days later, he was arrested and his party was disqualified from all elections until 2030, allegedly for failing to sign an electoral code of conduct by the deadline. Human rights groups argue the move was politically motivated, aimed at silencing the most popular opposition leader. Local media reported multiple arrests of Chadema supporters attending rallies, while others have gone missing. Another Bard candidate, Luhaga Mpina of the ACT Wazalendo party, was disqualified during the primaries for what election officials described as procedural violations. His removal further narrowed the field to minor figures with little political base. With her main challengers eliminated, Hassan's campaign has been the only visible one on a national scale. Her rallies have drawn large crowds in Dar es Salaam and Dodoma, supported by the full weight of the ruling party's machinery. By contrast, smaller parties have confined their campaigns to regional centers, lacking the funding and freedom to reach broader audiences. Security forces have taken a zero-tolerance approach to dissent. Hassan recently warned citizens against heeding calls to boycott the election or to protest, asserting that the only demonstrations permitted would be those of people going to cast their votes. Police have echoed her stance, cautioning that anyone spreading inciting content online would face prosecution. Tanzania has a history of restricting access to social media during elections and protests, and this year is no different. Only select media outlets, largely those aligned with government narratives, have been granted accreditation to cover the elections. In Zanzibar, the political environment is somewhat more open. The semi-autonomous island, governed under a coalition since 2020, will see incumbent Hussein Mwinyi of the CCM face his own deputy, Othman Masood of ACT Wazalendo. Observers say that while competition exists there, the ruling party's dominance still overshadows any real threat to its control. Beyond the political drama, Tanzanians face pressing economic and social challenges. The economy, valued at about $85 billion, has shown steady growth in recent years. The World Bank reports that inflation has remained below the central bank's 5% target, and the country has avoided the debt distress that has affected several East African neighbors. Gold exports, tourism, and agriculture, particularly coffee, cashew nuts, and cotton, remain the backbone of Tanzania's GDP. Yet despite macroeconomic stability, nearly 49% of Tanzanians still live below the international poverty line. In July, the government imposed new restrictions, barring foreigners from operating businesses in 15 sectors, including tour guiding, mobile money transfers, small-scale mining, and agricultural purchasing. Authorities claimed the move was meant to protect local entrepreneurs, though critics saw it as economic nationalism that risks deterring investment. The ban caused tensions within the East African community, especially with Kenya, whose citizens form a significant portion of Tanzania's small business owners. The government's push to expand conservation zones has led to conflict with indigenous Maasai communities who resist eviction from ancestral lands. After violent clashes in 2022, the World Bank suspended a $150 million grant and the European Union cancelled another $20 million in aid, citing human rights concerns. Tanzania's image as one of East Africa's most stable democracies has come under question. The combination of suppressed opposition, controlled media, and judicial manipulation has prompted warnings from international observers that the country's democratic institutions are eroding. The United Nations Human Rights Council has recorded over 200 cases of enforced disappearances since 2019. Among them were two activists, Kenyan photojournalist Boniface Mwangi and Ugandan reporter Agatha Atuhaire, who were detained while attending Lissu's trial in May 2025. Both reported being tortured before being abandoned at border crossings. Such reports have deepened fears that the upcoming election is less a democratic exercise and more an affirmation of power. As Tanzanians head to the polls, the mood is subdued. Voting stations will open across the country, but few expect surprises. President Hassan is poised to secure another term, buoyed by the legacy of the ruling party, the weakness of her opponents, and a political system built to preserve continuity over competition. Yet beneath the calm surface, questions remain about the future of Tanzania's democracy, the fate of its opposition, and whether the promised reform can coexist with a system that silences dissent. For now, Tanzania stands at a crossroads, between progress and power, stability and freedom, and between the image of democracy and its reality.